When I first got into anime, there was an aspect that captured my attention beyond the novelty of serious animation not made for kids. Death Note was so easy to get into because the premise was, and still is, so strong. From there I got to see the incredible world building and fantastical ideas that made up shows like Psycho Pass, Re:Zero, Full Metal Alchemist, and Angel Beats. But at a certain point, the absurd and mind-blowing starts becoming mundane. Complex magical systems, otherworldly settings, demons being reincarnated from fantasy worlds and into our world, and slice-of-life shows with wild supernatural twists all just feel similar to the hundreds of other bizarre concepts we see all the time in anime. However, the problem with these stories isn't that the concepts have gotten old. Re:Zero, for example, is still a fantastic show even after watching many isekai. I learned the reason for this from taking the masterclass of a professional author. It was a long time ago, but one specific lesson has still stuck with me. Concept doesn't matter. It won't make a good story. The premise does help with getting people into it, however. It would be ridiculous to deny that Death Note's concept wasn't heavily responsible for its success. So a good concept is like a beautiful gift wrapping. It looks attractive, but it's not as important as the quality and thoughtfulness put into the writing. Death Note is great because Light and L's mind game battles are extremely entertaining, not just because the Death Note is a really cool idea. The proof to the quality of the writing is in the live-action Death Note adaptation from Netflix that is universally hated, despite having access to one of the greatest storytelling concepts ever. So, what happens when your concept is terrible? I mean, really terrible. Watching through what I think are the two best new anime currently airing, I realize they both have bad concepts that seem more like a joke than professionally created entertainment. However, they are fantastic shows. Let's talk about Vending Machine Isekai, and the first major point to this video. If you haven't seen anything about reincarnated as a vending machine, now I wander the dungeon, it's pretty self-explanatory. After a man is reincarnated into a fantasy world as this, he solves problems for adventurers with only the powers of a magical coin-operated device. You could argue this is a great concept because it's so absurd that it's intriguing, but really, it's just so stupid. Now, I'm not gonna pretend this is some masterpiece or anything, but I think it's legitimately good. It's not like so bad it's fun to watch or anything like that, and it's not completely just a comedy either. There's a lot of comedy in it, and I found a lot of the jokes very funny, but it isn't solely a comedy series. It's not nearly as focused on making you laugh as a show like Konosuba, for example. The fact that it takes itself even somewhat serious just makes it sound even worse. But this is actually what makes it work. Concept doesn't matter to create a good story, but it has to matter to the author in crafting that story. So many isekai have a decent initial premise, but quickly give up on their one good idea so we can get right into the bland story of an overpowered loser who gets a harem. What really makes Vending Machine stand out is that it sticks to its premise. It promised a magical vending machine stuck in a dungeon, and that's exactly what we get. The best idea in the world doesn't make a good story, but a good writer will respect their premise and build the story around it. Vending Machine Isekai has likable characters, interesting world building, and good comedy, but it sticks to being about a vending machine. Doing this satisfies our initial curiosity about the series. What is it like being an inanimate object? What help could a magical sentient vending machine bring to a fantasy world? It shows us all of this throughout each episode, and a vending machine in this setting is a lot more helpful than you would initially think. An example of the opposite of this is the trope of searching for a MacGuffin, like the holy grail that promises immense power or riches, only for the characters to give it up at the last moment, so we never get to see what it actually does. This works in some stories, but it's often disappointing. The one thing we were promised to see wasn't shown. But in the case of Vending Machine Isekai, the one thing we are promised is incredibly stupid. The bad premise doesn't matter because it's a good show. But being a good show, it respects its premise. It's difficult to write a story where the main character can't directly communicate, can't move, and is completely dependent on those around him to push forward the plot. Instead of giving him a magical way to move or full access to language, he's left that way, and that's where most of the conflict and comedy come from. You may think this show is stupid and there's nothing interesting in it for you, but you have to respect that it takes itself serious enough to have rules within this stupid premise and stick to them. But what happens when you have a great premise, an emotional, exciting, and horrifying one, and then have a main character that doesn't take it seriously at all? It's miserable, they feel so fake. It undermines the entire story and there's nothing to relate to. But this is exactly what the best new show this season did. Zom 100 is a serious zombie apocalypse story with a character that completely clashes with its horrifying and dark setting. While millions die around him, he acts like a One Piece character, having the time of his life. At the same time, he's not evil or completely insane. His tragic backstory that made him this way is only that he worked at an exploitative company. Once again, this isn't just a comedy or parody. It is very funny at times, but this isn't just setting up and paying off jokes. There's real risk, life and death situations, along with an overarching plot and theme about living life to the fullest. It also takes its setting and world seriously. In episode 4, we get to see survivors acting what you'd expect of a person living in an apocalypse. Akira makes friends with one of the girls, but at the end of the episode, she is bitten by a zombie. This is not Akira's first loss. The girl he liked at his job also died in a similar way. In both situations, he cries for them, but then moves on really quickly. The second time, it is especially ridiculous. He meets up with his friend right after the girl had been bitten. They escape and celebrate that they managed to get a big screen TV, which was the initial goal of their excursion. Akira's friend's death was not a joke. It was an emotional and sad moment, but after this, he barely deals with her death at all. It immediately changes to a lighthearted scene right after. So how does this show work? It doesn't really take its setting seriously with how its characters react to it. Isn't that what makes the concept work? The reason the show isn't awful is that it's doing all of this on purpose. The story's concept isn't about the horrors of zombies, and it isn't here to make fun of it either. Instead, it's dealing with the idea that death is always nearby, whether we acknowledge it or not. So enjoy your life even when horrible things are going on around you. This theme summarizes the idea that goes into scenes and situations that really shouldn't work. It seems it would be funny and hard to care about, or heartfelt and not very fun. But somehow it's both darkly humorous and emotional. The best way I can describe it is that the author is unapologetic about the story he is trying to tell. We've seen a million zombie stories that are dark and depressing. Let's see something more lighthearted that still takes the zombie seriously. In a way, this is even more true to its concept than many other zombie stories, because the zombies are the main threat. It's not focused on drama with other humans killing to survive. It's about trying to live a somewhat normal life in a zombie apocalypse. For both of these shows, it's the small details that make a difference. Both premises are ridiculous. Describing the plot of either of these, it's really easy to imagine them being terrible shows. But the way Akira reacts to his new friend being killed really shows how great this story is. He walks away looking distraught, but once he sees his other friend alive and carrying a massive TV, he wipes the tears from his face, laughs, and escapes the building. It still switches the mood very quickly, but these small details help bridge the gap and remind us this isn't a depressing story, but it is a dark world, and a lot can be drawn out from what Akira was feeling and thinking in that moment. In a lesser but similar way, Vending machine dispensing Diet Coke and Mentos, while not being able to explain to the fantasy characters how to shoot it at an enemy, is funny but also just purely entertaining. It's a stupid idea, but he's a vending machine. How else is he supposed to help? In the end, this video was just made so I could talk about my two favorite new shows coming out this season, and this aspect that stuck out to me. No matter how bad, outlandish, or even generic your premise is, what matters isn't the concept, but the way you tell it. More than anything, the most important part is if you're purposeful and authentic in the story you are trying to tell, and that includes the concept. If you like this video, go check out these videos where I analyzed every single new anime in the summer 2023 season. Those videos performed terribly, so I'd appreciate your views. I put a ton of work into them. That's all from me, Jamio.